everybody, and welcome to the Healthtech Pigeon podcast, bringing you the top health tech news stories and analysis every week. I'm Belle Taylor, coming in from the official start of bank holiday season, best time of the year. And today I'm joined by two brilliant guests to discuss this week's news in health tech. From SomX, we have Amy Thomas and, of course, Adama in the background as our brilliant producer. And we're also delighted to be joined today by Tjasa Zajc, a health tech journalist, speaker, and host of the Faces of Digital Health podcast. Before we begin, I'm going to hand over to both of you. Welcome to Healthtech Pigeon. Love to know how your week's been. And in the case of both of you, maybe a short intro for our listeners as well.
I can do a little short one to begin. Thanks, Belle. Great to be here as always on Pigeon. My week's been good, productive. I had a bit of illness last few weeks, so it's great to be back at work. Feeling we've got lots of new clients on board. There's lots of momentum, so loving to see that. And in terms of a quick intro, I'm the account director, PR lead here at SomX, and my background's in science communications. I've worked in agencies, in-house at biotech, in academia, all over the place, really. But actually, this week was my 6 months mark at SomX, so very pleased about that, and looking forward to hearing more from you. And looking forward to it.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Tjasa. I'm the host of Faces of Digital Health podcast. I used to be a full-time journalist, but then I actually transitioned to healthcare IT, where I worked as a business development specialist for over 7 years. Faces of Digital Health has been up and running for the last 8 years, and it focuses on how different healthcare systems around the world adopt technology. So my focus has really been in different healthcare system structure and healthcare policy. And lately, I've been on a very interesting journey of working as a special advisor for HIMSS Europe, helping them with the program for this year's event. So that's me in brief.
Nice. Well, thank you both for joining. I'm looking forward to diving into this week's stories. I know you've both chosen already, and hopefully they speak to your interests and strengths. We'll have a really great discussion today. I know Amy's been been secretly working with similar topics for her master's presentation a few years ago, so we can get to that.
We'll get to that.
Amazing. All right, so let us roll into story number one. From Tech EU, we have the story. Europe's health tech and AI startups raised $13.9 billion in quarter one as global investors return. So in the first quarter of this year, European health tech and AI startups raised basically $14 billion in funding, marking a significant rebound for the sector. Showing again confidence in Europe's growing health tech system. But interestingly in this, there's a clear shift towards more advanced AI and digital health solutions, with AI startups receiving 25% of all EU VC funding in Q1. I thought quite interesting from the article, they said that when you strip out AI, there's actually been a decrease in funding. So AI is more than making up for this sort of the environment currently. And then within AI, we're seeing AI for drug discovery emerging as the leading segment. That might be no surprise to regular listeners. They've secured $949 million in investing over the quarter, with industrial technology coming in second at 669. So some big numbers here, and obviously we love to hear stories of financial confidence in health tech when it's not always the way. I know the past few years have felt pretty dicey at times. But I think it is really clear that investors are more focused on scaling technologies that promise to reshape healthcare delivery. So I'd love to hear from both of you. What do you think of this story? Why did you choose it? What factors do you think have contributed to this resurgence? Do you think the AI boom is here to stay?
Yeah, absolutely. So the reason I chose this story was because I think that AI is everywhere right now, and it's quite striking to see how, especially agentic AI, is going to reshape anything from second opinions, optimizing work processes, and also impacting the workforce shortages that are basically imminent. According to WHO, by 2030, we are supposed to lack 10 million doctors, and 2030 is coming up in 5 years, so very soon. And I'm very excited to see that agentic AI is actually something that might make that um, uh, shortage a bit smaller.
Great. Well, I can jump in a little bit with a couple
Yeah.
of thoughts, and actually, and potentially another question for Tjasa. Yeah, obviously, as Belle said, it's great to see the appetite, the funding into digital health and AI. But actually, the statistic around that AI startups raised 25% of European VC capital this quarter, which was up from 7% a decade ago, is quite interesting. And I wondered if maybe we might have predicted that would be higher, or I wonder how much that would be increasing. So yeah, that's one point that it would be quite interesting to potentially dig into. But also the emphasis on AI drug discovery, I find this really fascinating area, because obviously there's a lot of attention on AI drug discovery, and given that there's more funding in this area, it'd be great to hear from you, Tjasa, what you've seen, what you've spoken about. What do you feel about AI drug discovery? Is it something that seems quite far away? Do you think this extra funding might actually allow us to kind of speed up and start getting those AI discovered therapeutics and drugs actually into clinic faster? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
AI discovery is not a new field at all. It might have been highlighted a little bit more because of the whole AI boom that we've been seeing in the last 2 years. But In silico medicine is a well-established company that has already designed new medications with the help of AI. Yeah, it's worth checking their website to see which types of indications they're looking into. But the potential is definitely there, especially also with the rise of efforts for synthetic data and the development of digital twins that could also fill out the holes of where data is lacking. As we know, the health equity is one of the huge challenges that we face in healthcare and healthcare research. So if we could create data sets even where data is missing and also use that for research, there's definitely a lot of potential that's happening in the space. So, as you said, no surprise there.
I think what's really interesting for me is, as you say, this isn't new, and AI, the people who've been talking and doing AI for decades now, actually will think of drug discovery as the obvious use case. It's vast volumes of data to analyze, and machine learning and AI is the way to do that, really. I think what's interesting about this story, and you mentioned actually at the top of your answer about kind of the rise of agentic AI, is we're sort of seeing a move away from AI just being used for that data analysis phase to also allowing us to, or us, I say, allowing drug discovery companies and drug designing companies to design and generate potential therapies. So it's not just taking vast volumes of things, crunching them and spitting stuff out. It's now actually designing libraries of potential antibodies, molecules, therapies, and then being able to take that through testing. And also things as well, like I've talked before on the podcast how I love the Nobel Prizes, also the second best time of the year, to say bank holidays are first. But obviously with kind of AlphaFold and the team behind that winning the Nobel Prize and that being open access, we're starting to see this area just absolutely expand as to just the potential of what people can do. Like, people are now able to perfectly visualize what proteins might look like in order to help generate drugs for therapeutics further down the line. So I think we're just seeing AI come to its fore at every stage of that. And it's so encouraging to see that the investor appetite is following that, because at the end of the day, biotech is so expensive, and the amount of money going to drug discovery, is that indicative of the fact that more people are investing in it? Or is it simply that they're investing higher funds because drug discovery just eats money? Because the second you get to clinical trials, even, preclinical trials, it's just, you hemorrhage money. It costs a lot. So I'd actually like to dig into those numbers a little bit as well and see, like, well, what is the kind of average amount like raised per companies and things, to see if it's a case of volume or rather value. Super interesting. Is there anything else either of you wanted to add on this story? I guess potentially more generally about kind of startups in general. This is obviously a European story. And I feel like lots of the news has been quite US focused recently. So quite refreshing to get some good news out of Europe when it comes to funding and investor appetite. What challenges do you think in the kind of current global environment these companies or startups might face?
One thing that I would definitely mention, also kind of replying to what you mentioned, is that it's not just about the increase in funding. The huge impact is the technology advancements and the data efforts that we
Yeah.
see all across the world. So I have high hopes regarding the European health data space that's about to be developed and is creating a real opportunity for Europe by making some data available. I think when we do talk about that, it's worth emphasizing that when we say healthcare data, it's actually a really broad term, and there's a new book that just came out by Fidelia Caschini around the secondary use of data. So secondary use of data refers to the use of data that's not directly used for what data was primarily collected, either the, let's say, clinical trial or direct care that the patient receives. And so the whole ecosystem of healthcare data consists of real world data, which is the data that you want to collect after the drug already enters the market. In clinical trials, we collect very specific types of data and also choose very specific types of patients based on their data and their characteristics. There's administrative data, biobanking data, electronic healthcare records, genomic and proteomics data. And by basically establishing new rules and creating common data standards for these types of data and making it into this whole huge data pool for secondary use on the European level, that's also where I see the real importance of
Mhm.
potential changes that we will see in AI development in Europe.
Yeah, I think data's getting bigger day by day, and I think there is now such an understanding of the power of that data and the reason for clear kind of use cases and policies that outline how people can use it responsibly as well, whilst keeping that impact, because it's such an incredible opportunity, right? I think Europe is in a great place here because Europe has a history of, it's lots of countries working independently, but they've got a history of working closely together with data transfer and data sharing and that sort of thing. It's a bit harder when you cross kind of different sorts of geographical borders, but that's not to say it's not possible. But
Mhm.
I do think it's an exciting time to be in drug discovery and in AI more generally.
Mm. One thing that I would definitely also just like to mention is since you mentioned, geopolitical differences and situations, given the funding cuts that we see in the US for especially for diversity programs, I think we have a huge opportunity here to still keep supporting the funding for things like women's health, things like making sure that the data sets represent different groups of people, because this is crucial if we want to discover drugs that are beneficial for different populations, and also make sure that the healthcare outcomes on the European level are comparable regardless of your race, ethnicity, or gender. Amy, apologies. I saw that you wanted to add something, so please go ahead.
No, it's interesting listening to you both talk about this, and I was just going to add on that the data piece, and actually it follows on from what you were just saying. I think about equalities and addressing those gaps. Potentially, there's such an opportunity for the European health kind of ecosystem to really have that moment where we're utilizing AI, but also keeping that kind of quality of data and utilizing the clinical and human data that we have. And it's that combination of, we're not just focusing, we're not saying that AI is going to solve everything and that's the answer. It's actually utilizing those tools with the clinical research that we have, with that strong kind of moral, ethical standpoint that we want to retain. And I think there's a really nice opportunity to kind of, for Europe to be that leader in that space of high quality healthcare and data. So yeah, it's exciting that we can obviously see the momentum in AI, but it's also how we use that with the current clinical data that we already have and the programs that already are existing on the ground. So there's a challenge, but also an opportunity to kind of be a leader in that.
Totally agree. And what a lovely note to end that story on. So thank you both. All right, let's move on to story number 2. From Forbes, we have the story Driving Fertility and Perimenopause Innovations for Women's Health, one of our favourite topics on Healthtech Pigeon, or at least when I'm present. So, the healthcare landscape for women is undergoing a transformation with innovations focused on fertility and perimenopause. And with the global infertility treatment market projected to reach $3.65 billion by 2034, this is obviously significant. Now, this article primarily focuses on the company Uva, whose at-home hormone tracking tools are empowering women to take control of their health, with the insights helping women better understand their bodies and managing their own fertility or perimenopause journeys. Now, we've discussed this often on the podcast, but there's obviously a significant shift towards more personalised and accessible healthcare solutions. And nowhere is this more evident than in women's health, where women often face huge barriers to care and often have to take control of their own health because we've, accessed lots of these barriers in the past. Well, not accessed, come across. So, as we understand more about women's health and as technology continues to improve, I have no doubt this will continue to be the case. But Amy, Tjasa, I'd love to know your thoughts. In fact, Tjasa, since you're a first-time guest on the podcast, I'll let you go away on women's health because we can get sucked into this conversation for hours at a time. And I'd love you to lead it since you chose the story. But how do you think user-led and at-home solutions, such as Uva's at-home hormone tracking, are transforming women's health management? And are there any other thoughts that this article brings to mind for you?
Well, the thing that kind of got me interested in this article was that um, these at-home kits that are meant for measuring hormones might bring new data sets to the field of understanding women's health and just enriching the women's health field because, at the moment, I'm just gonna speak, from the female perspective, but like sometimes when your mood changes, you're like, oh, maybe it's the weather. Oh, maybe I've got PMS. Oh, maybe it's something else. And you don't really know. And it just shows how little we actually know. So the data part was what kind of intrigued me most in this, article.
I think as well just following on from what you said there, Tiesha, about the kind of very personal feel around this, I think obviously we talk about the shift to personalized medicine as a whole, but I think there are certain areas which lend itself very well to that, and you can see, from data that you can get that day-to-day value out of it, and that's what I love about this story. It's like, as women, we experience our health in a way that's very personal to us, and having the power to have that knowledge yourself, I think is really empowering, especially when there might be certain areas that you want to get more knowledge on that could be more important to you. So having that ability to test, to find out results, it seems in this story the app is obviously using AI to kind of personalize those tests and questionnaires and results, so you get that in-depth knowledge based on what's important to you, which I think is a really great thing for women's health. And it's if there are things that we can outsource almost to people themselves to take control of, which benefits you as a patient, but also clinicians, then I think that's a really positive thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think to Tiasha's earlier point as well around kind of this bringing data, it's adding this whole new layer to how we think about and measure our own health. So it's not just, oh, I feel a bit groggy today, or I feel a bit sort of down in the dumps, or oh, I've got more energy than I did, or my skin's clearer, or all these sort of random metrics of how your hormones are feeling on a day-to-day basis. And obviously it fluctuates literally daily. But now having this layer of data, I think it's empowering people in a twofold way. It's obviously empowering the user, the person tracking their own data. And like you say, everyone's on different journeys. They might be trying to get pregnant. They might be in the stages of perimenopause. They might just be having troubles with their health, that they think are down to a like largely unclustered group of symptoms that don't like clearly point towards one specific disease or illness. And I think this sort of data can allow women to really advocate for their own healthcare and go to their healthcare professional and say, look, as well as feeling XYZ over the last month, here's what my data is showing. I think there's something to uncover here. And then from the doctor's point of view, they actually are able to say, okay, well, I can't come in on one day and say, here's how I feel today, and that's going to point towards it. You, especially with women's health thing, it takes, for endometriosis, I think it takes something like 3 years to get diagnosed.
10.
Is it
10.
10?
It's 10
Yeah,
years.
I mean, it's
10
outrageous.
years.
So you need this long time of data collection. And I think having at-home devices that allow us to track that is creating a really rich data set. So even if I'm not struggling with anything now, if 3, 4, 5, 10 years in the future, I am having those discussions, I can look back at this rich data source and say, like, what has happened to my personal health over that time? I think it's really empowering as a woman, as just a person in general working within healthcare systems. I can see the value of it, but like it just feels like any data that we can be collecting, especially in areas where we know it's so difficult to diagnose conditions, can only be a good thing.
And it would almost be impossible for doctors to track that for each person individually. Like it just
Yeah.
wouldn't, it's so complex. And
Yeah.
having the ability to do that ourselves is great, because it wouldn't really be possible otherwise.
Mm.
And the way that hormones interact in our bodies is still unknown, a lot of it. So having that the data piece, the kind of over time, the longitudinal data is really valuable.
And it also, like, it uncovers links. And actually, this is kind of to your point of the previous story, Tiasha, about sort of these secondary things that you don't think of to start with. But, there might be links that have yet to be discovered between hormones and other areas of health, cardiovascular health, respiratory health, whatever that might be, how likely you are to get certain cancers or things. We don't necessarily know all those links yet, but having the data means that in the future, researchers will be able to use that to guide their own research and then any therapeutic developments off the back of it.
Maybe just one last thing to mention while we're talking about how much we don't know and what we should know.
Yeah.
Something maybe the listeners might want to do some research on if they're interested in women's health is also the whole field of ovarian health, which is in development in the last few years, because as it turns out, ovaries are. Jennifer Garrison is a US researcher that likes to say that we should stop calling ovaries reproductive organs, but rather the architects of health, because in a similar way as we like to talk about the gut brain
Mm.
connections, ovaries are actually also communicating or influencing many other changes that are happening in the female body. So, I think data collection is number one. It's worth also warning that we might not know what to do with the data at this point, because we first need to find the findings. So I would be cautious about getting too excited that just because you start gathering some data, that suddenly your clinician is gonna know what to do with that. But it's definitely a start that has a potential to uncover new findings in the future.
And I think there is, even if, like you say, we're not at a point where we can necessarily make massive therapeutic leaps off the back of it yet, but we're seeing such a huge trend in users feeling more empowered. Obviously, this was the company Uber. We know Fertility is doing a great thing in the space with at-home testing for fertility. People really are taking this into their own hands. So if nothing else, then let that be sort of the positive, empowering thing from this, is that how lucky are we to live in a time where we are able to do that? And if we are interested in delving deeper into our own health, technology has meant that we have the tools to do so now, which I think can only be a good thing. There are questions around, and this was another question on my list, so I will ask this of you now, around sort of data and privacy. And obviously, if we are tracking our own stuff, how is that on the user in ensuring that their data is safe, secured, shared with people that they are happy for it to be shared with, and not people that they're not happy for it to be shared with, particularly around women's personal health. We've talked about this before, but obviously in America now, doctors and apps are, people are allowed to ask apps for women's history of kind of their fertility to use potentially as evidence if they live in certain states and things like that, which is a harrowing place to be. So there is also something really, really crucial to be said here around how are we ensuring that this data doesn't end up in the wrong hands, and that women are empowered to opt in and out of that data sharing when they want to. So I'd love to get both of your thoughts on that, as well, both as women and as people working in health and healthcare.
If I start, as a European, I truly believe that regulation plays a key part in this story. We cannot expect consumers to be subjected to changes of terms and conditions of different applications or different products. It's the legislation and the policy that needs to be the safeguard for us, and just kind of dictate to and direct innovators in which sense and how solutions need to be developed, so that the data that's gathered through those applications is not taken advantage of. So that's kind of my thinking, and that's why I'm also very glad that to a degree we have quite strict regulation in Europe, because I think it does have a protective role in this sense.
Yeah, and regulation obviously I think is a key part, as you just mentioned. Just from a personal standpoint, in terms of data privacy security, I think it's the end goal, which for me that's the important piece of where the data is going to be used and what it's used for. If the data is going to be furthering research, if it's going to be within the healthcare system, looking at new treatments, how hormones interact in the body. Great. I'm so happy for that data to be used in that way. But if the data is going to products and advertising and marketing or social media, then that raises different questions for me. So I think, yeah, maybe transparency is a part of this as well as regulation. So people are a bit informed about what's going to happen with this kind of data and like ethically how that sits with people.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's also, I might sign up to a service, and then a few years down the line, that service gets bought out by someone, or they change their business milestones and they start advertising in a way that they didn't before. So it's that transparency of, because you could make the most informed decision in the world, and then things completely out of your control could change, and it's still within regulatory guidance, so nothing has changed in terms of what is legally allowed to be done with your data. But there is sort of an onus on the owners of these businesses to be transparent in what they're doing with it, so that your data doesn't just find its way somewhere that you have no idea about. and you have opted in good faith that it's used for research for these good things, and then they decide to sell it off to the highest bidder for completely other uses, and you end up making someone a lot of money who you maybe don't want to, or vice versa. So it's a tricky one, and I think Noah's privacy feel more personal than women's health. I feel like you started this by saying it feels very personal to you because we have our own such unique journeys, and so I feel like we hold that really close to us, as we should. But obviously, it affects all industries. But yeah, okay. Well, a lovely discussion today. We can talk about this honestly for ages, and I'm keen to know, like, do you track your own women's health? But I think that's maybe not the right time and place. We can talk about that another day. We'll have a coffee. Wonderful. All right, let's move on to the final story of the day. A recent study has shown that a single dose of psychedelic compound can significantly boost brain flexibility for weeks, suggesting promising therapeutic applications for conditions such as depression, PTSD, and neurodegenerative diseases. The study, carried out on female and male mice, found that a single administration of the selective serotonin 2A receptor against 25-CN-NBOH, for the nerds, produces significant long-lasting improvements in cognitive flexibility when measured 2 to 3 weeks post-treatment. Now, there is a growing trend in psychedelic-assisted therapies. It's not been the first time we've mentioned it on the podcast, and they are increasingly seen as a potential alternative or as a complement to traditional psychiatric treatments, especially with the potential to address treatment-resistant mental health disorders, and potentially the added benefit of prolonged effects after these single doses. But they do also raise questions on safety, efficacy, and the key word of today, it seems, regulatory challenges too. So I'm going to start by asking Amy about this because Amy's master's research was in psychedelic therapies. So give us the rundown.
Yeah,
Tell us why this is your tour de force.
Well,
what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I've quite a few thoughts reading this, and actually it brought back quite a few memories of my thesis at Imperial, which was looking at microdosing, LSD, and psychedelics. I think, yeah, on reading this, it made me smile, the story, because there's something. Obviously, it's a mouse study, but there's something inherently quite interesting about this idea of unlocking the brain mechanisms. And I think, from a media perspective, it's a nice story to read. You're looking at a drug, a chemical compound that is sort of altering the brain chemistry, perhaps for weeks after. So I think, reading that it sort of raises a lot of questions about the potential of those kind of chemicals and what they can do. Obviously, it is a mouse study, so translating that into humans is still very far away. Interestingly, yeah, as you mentioned, Belle, we've been talking about, there's been a lot of talk about psychedelic therapies for quite a while. Like, I remember almost, I think maybe about 8 years ago, there was that big documentary series where they got famous people to take a little bit of LSD live on TV, a small dose of it, and then kind of measured their reactions. And it was really an awareness piece to show the potential of these kind of therapies. And I think a lot that has been spoken about in this area is to do with regulation, but it's also the fact that there's been a lot of hindered progress looking at psychedelic research because of the regulations. So a lot of labs and research institutions around the world haven't been able to progress very far with this research because there's been very strict regulations on the class of drug that it is. So for certain situations, if there is a high class drug that is being researched, some labs might even have to have security guards outside, which is an extra cost. So people steer away from looking at these kind of compounds. But it does raise really interesting questions around the potential for these therapies. But yeah, there's a degree of caution about, obviously this is a mouse study, and how far we take that. But it's obviously great to see, and I'd love to hear Tjasa's thoughts as well, and also why you chose this story out of all the ones that we could have talked about.
So yeah, I chose this story because, as you mentioned yourself, we've seen a bit of a psychedelic boom in the last few years. Psychedelics, as such, are not anything new in terms of the use for medical research. The MAPS Institute has been working on research for decades, in essence, and actually, the first reports about research on the positive impact that psychedelic might have on especially mental health, depression, or PTSD, come from the 60s with Dr. Stanislav Grof. So, what I thought was kind of the reason I chose this study, this article, is exactly because it just kind of mentions the topic again, even though it's not a new topic, and we did see a lot of progress, especially in the US in the last few years, with the huge setback last year when, in August, the FDA did not approve the first MDMA supported drug that could come on the market. And the big lesson from that story for me is not that, regulation is too uptight to support the introduction of psychedelics into medicine, but actually that it was a huge opportunity. But based on the research that was also done in light of that kind of approval process, is that basically the trials that were conducted had a loosely defined form of therapy, and psychedelics are always connected to therapy, and it's very difficult to unify or to create a streamlined patient pathway or guidelines for clinicians or therapists with that approach as you would want to see in drugs. So I guess we have still a long way to go in that sense. We'll see how the field gets formalized, in a sense that a company would create a drug out of psychedelics, but even without that, these treatments are happening, even if maybe not very legally or maybe advertised in a way. But yeah, we're in an era where it's increasingly clear that, also with the rise of all the mental health challenges, we need new approaches that go beyond just the chemical substances that we've known so far.
Yeah, and if I just could jump in again, actually, it's really linked to some of the research that I did in my thesis. So, um, I studied the interactions of people microdosing LSD for their own depression and anxiety in drug forums online. So there's communities of people online. There's a few different kind of drug forums where people discuss. Actually, there's almost this sort of citizen science happening within the forums where, because of this sort of lack of traditional pathway, and this was a few years ago now, so things might have changed up a little bit, but because of the lack of the more traditional pathway for researching these kind of chemicals, people are actually performing their own sort of science and experiments. And it's interesting from a kind of social perspective to look at that process, in that people are searching for therapies, people are searching for new ways to unlock, therapy. They want to, to break out of that depression or anxiety that they're experiencing, and find that these doses of LSD are helpful. And what you see in these forums is actually quite a highly regulated process going on. They have moderators within the forum that give very strict advice for people taking, like, how much dose to take, people's own personal experiences of taking small doses of LSD and psychedelics, how in detail how that impacts their depression, how that impacts their anxiety. So there's almost this sort of underground community happening of people trying to figure this out themselves, given that there's been perhaps a less traditional process of getting those drugs. Having said that, obviously there's a lot of questions around that idea in itself, but it's a really interesting kind of portion of society that we've sort of taken it upon ourselves to conduct these experiments in lieu of actually that more traditional pathway. So yeah, it's interesting.
It's fascinating what you both say, and I think what kind of feels really pertinent to me is I remember when that MDA therapy got kind of not approved, and it felt like a real setback because it already feels that psychedelic therapies have to sort of overprove their seriousness to get to clinical trial stage. So it doesn't, because it is new and it is maybe a bit scary to some people that we're allowing these things. So it sort of feels you've got to tick every single box and then more just to show that this is a legitimate therapy or therapeutic pathway. And it felt like it was a poor study, and it just set people back because it made it look like it's sort of a lax field, which is absolutely not the case. And like you say, it has to be really strictly defined. I think this story shows real promise in that because it is a single dose and they've measured those effects over time, which is far more similar to how we'd measure a normal therapy. How it links with your comment, Amy, in a way which it's interesting, but it makes you realize that we do need healthcares to overview this because, they're saying here that a single dose could last 20 days. You're still seeing the effects 20 days later. Now, if you're not actually measuring that yourself and you're kind of doing your at-home studies or anything, and you decide that on day 1 I do this, on day 2 I do this, on day 4 I do this, you might end up with these sort of effects over time where you're building up these therapies. So actually you're not measuring the effects of one dose. You might have thought it's worn off and move on to your next dose, but you're building up this, in your system. So I do think like it really does need this clinical oversight. I think it's great that people are doing it on themselves. And when we had at the SomX thing, the Healthtech talks the other day, everyone's talking about biohacking and using their own data and stuff. And I think it's it's great in many ways that people feel empowered to do so and are seeking out places where they can do that in a way that feels safe to them. That's the key. They're not just sitting at home being like, and today we'll do this.
Can you imagine doing that with any other medicine though? Just taking it upon yourself to kind of figure out what dose is going to work for you.
It's insane.
It's crazy.
But I think it's because people, they've with like medicinal cannabis and things. I know obviously that now has its uses in some places across the world. That's allowed to be prescribed and things like that. So people are sort of feeling like, well, why aren't you letting us try the other stuff? Like, what's the hold up here? And it's a bit of an educational thing. It's like, by the way, guys, these therapies that you do use have been in development for decades. They didn't just start last year. It takes a long time, and you have to go through all these different trials on mice, on then humans, in order to get to the point where someone can use them safely with their doctor. But yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation, and linked to actually one of our clients, Amy, I've written down like what are the ethical considerations of not doing this. Completely different topic. That's about investing, but it's true. There are ethics here around the usage, obviously, but is it like it feels unethical not to pursue this? Like it is a potential therapeutic avenue. We don't yet know the outcomes, but there's enough there to generate more interest and more research, it seems.
Yeah, definitely. There's almost loads we could dig into in terms of the social constructs around drug policy and how that's influenced this area in particular. Obviously, LSD has been classed as an illegal substance. The war on drugs, all of that kind of narrative has, I think, fed into some of this hindered lack of progress. But maybe there's good reason for that. So yeah, but it's all about knowledge, isn't it, and development, and it's nice to see that people are more open to seeing psychedelics as potential therapies. But yes, regulation is needed, and to kind of get that evidence base so people aren't at the end of the day harming themselves, because that's the worst thing that you want.
Absolutely. Tjasa, any closing thoughts on this story?
No, not really. I mean, we'll see where things go with research. I agree. Yeah, if we are talking about introducing these things into the mainstream, regulation is definitely crucial to, just ensure patient safety.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you both for your thoughts. That leads us to the end of our stories today. So thanks both for your time. I very much appreciate it on a Friday morning. Don't forget to check out the best stories of the week in Healthtech Pigeon, or if biotech is more your speed, go across to Biotech Dodo. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. And also go across to Tjasa's podcast as well. So that's the Faces of Digital Health podcast, where there's 8 years of episodes to dig into. So you'll have a great time over there. Thanks both for your time today, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.